Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy in the new year. Thank you for joining us for our annual LAEDC forecast as we look forward to what is in store for our state and local economy. This time last year, we anticipated slow but continued economic growth. And 12 months later, we're wondering how long it will take to recover from the almost immediate pandemic induced recession. COVID-19 shook the global economy in 2020 and forced us to reassess many economic fundamentals. The rapid onset of the pandemic and the severity of the measures taken to mitigate the spread of the virus have forced governments to rapidly enact unprecedented relief bills for individuals and businesses alike. Before getting straight into the numbers, I'm going to touch briefly on the challenges of forecasting during a pandemic. Afterwards, we'll dive into our economic forecasts for the state, and we'll conclude with a look at some of the disparate effects of the pandemic. Whether forecasting raw inputs and supply chain processing, stock prices for tech indices, or unemployment in the United States, statistical processes were entirely thrown for a loop as a result of the pandemic's exogenous effects. While we have a better understanding of COVID-19 now, as opposed to a year ago, the science behind forecasting is still off kilter. A forecast is decomposed into three parts: trend, seasonality, and noise, all of which come together to form the end result. COVID-19 affected all three parts, changing past trends and seasonalities, as well as creating an immense amount of noise. And while I won't bore you with all of the sordid details of our forecasting model, I will share that it is hard to accurately determine new trends without a historical basis in which the model can learn from. Additionally, government policy can greatly affect the recovery speed, and the speed at which policy has been implemented in response to the pandemic has been expedient, to say the least. Data lags and reliability issues also pose major problems, especially when economic impacts such as employment are ever changing, as are public health orders that businesses must follow. All of these factors have resulted in economic forecasts varying widely from institution to institution. The forecast we're presenting today assumes that vaccine distribution will continue at its current pace and that interpersonal activities resume in Q3 of this year. Now that we covered our major assumptions, let's dive into our economic outlook for California through 2022. California had some of the strictest coronavirus regulations in the nation. Approximately 8.75% of Californians have tested positive for COVID-19. Per capita, San Bernardino County leads the way, followed by Riverside and Los Angeles counties, all with over 1,000 cases per 10,000 residents. Los Angeles County and its 10 million residents has more than 1 million confirmed cases, the most in any state nationwide. While daily COVID-19 cases are decreasing statewide, the next thing to watch for are other variants of the virus. Officials have expressed concern regarding the rising dominance of the UK variant, which spreads 50% faster. This variant has already been detected statewide in San Diego, Los Angeles, Orange County, San Bernardino, Alameda, San Mateo, and Yolo. The good news, the current vaccines appear to be effective against this strain. The bad news, they appear to be less effective against the South African variant. This strain hasn't been detected in California yet, but it has the potential to inhibit the brewing economic recovery if it is resistant to the currently developed vaccines. The stay-at-home order issued by Gavin Newsom on March 19th and the safer-at-home order issued for Los Angeles County on March 20th stopped non-essential activities in response to COVID-19. Restrictions and mandated closures led to unprecedented job losses in March and April. The reopening process began in May, and jobs were being added to payrolls again. However, spikes in the number of cases in July and late November led to reinstated restrictions, and employment once again faltered. As of December, just over half of the 2.5 million jobs lost in California in the months of March and April have returned, and close to 45% of the 716,000 jobs lost in Los Angeles County have been recovered. California's unemployment rose sharply from 3.9% in February to a peak of 16.4% in the months of April and May of 2020. Revenue losses and job losses were almost immediate. If you compare the current COVID-19 recession to the 2001 dot-com recession and the Great Recession, you can see that unemployment typically changes gradually over time in recessions related to the business cycle. Los Angeles County experienced a dramatic spike in unemployment directly after the safer-at-home orders were put into place. Unemployment improved after the immediate shock, but rates remain historically high. Real GDP growth in California dropped by 0.6% in 2020. That's down from 3.4% in 2019. The LAEDC expects this reduction in growth to continue, with real GDP growth forecasted at 2% for 2021 and 1.3% for the following year. LA County growth declined by 3% in 2020, but is expected to grow faster than the state at 2.8% in 2021 and 4.2% in 2022. Economic recovery should bring the unemployment rate in California from 10.4% in 2020 down to 9.4% in 2021 and 7.8% by the end of 2022. It's assuming the virus-related shocks are behind us. LA County is also expected to see a significant decline in its unemployment rate as leisure and hospitality industries resume their normal operations. In 2020, California's 39 million residents received increased unemployment benefits and economic stimulus payments, leading to a rise in personal income. Our forecast does not account for these increased benefits in 2021, and thus we show a decline in personal income. In subsequent years, personal income will rise once again as the California and Los Angeles economy recovers. Looking ahead, a major portion of economic growth statewide and in the Southern California region will come from the sectors hardest hit, including trade, transportation, and utilities, and leisure and hospitality. Sectors that face the most restrictions and closure mandates shed the most jobs in 2020. And these industries, as restrictions ease and they come back online, will be the ones adding workers back to their payrolls in order to accommodate activity closer to the pre-pandemic norm. For example, as restaurants are allowed to resume on-site indoor dining, they'll require wait staff in order to provide their service. Job growth in trade, transportation, and utilities will be driven by gains in retail trade and passenger-related transportation, which flatlined during the pandemic, like cruise lines and air travel. Some industries like information, which includes the motion picture and television industry, are expected to grow in the Southern California region, while they are expected to decline in other areas of the state. And manufacturing is expected to add jobs in Los Angeles County while losing jobs statewide. California housing has been a major topic in our past few annual forecasts, and it earns its spot again this year. In 2019, the median list price for a home in the state was $567,000. That's 82% higher than the US as a whole. In fact, it's the highest in the nation behind the state of Hawaii. Less than 55% of California residents are homeowners, and that's 10% less than the national rate of 66%. Plagued by zoning issues, NIMBY mindsets, high demand, and no supply, Southern California boasts an even higher median list price of $726,000. That's 28% over that statewide median. Demographic trends show that people are moving. A population for the county of Los Angeles has decreased the past 3 years and is projected to decrease for the Southern California region and state as a whole in the coming years, per the California Department of Finance demographics team. For many California residents, rent is eating up a major portion of their income. A rent burden, defined as a household who spends more than 30% of their income on rent, remains a major issue for many households in the state. While rent burden has decreased slightly over the last decade, Over 50% of all California households are rent burdened, and 25% are extremely rent burdened, spending more than half of their income on housing. If we break down rent burden by income, we see that 91% of households making less than $20,000 per year and 87% of households making less than $50,000 per year are rent burdened. While California's eviction moratorium has been extended until June 30th of this year, tenants are expected to pay back rent in the coming months. And so California is staring down a potential eviction crisis. While COVID-19 has been the largest economic event in recent history, California's housing crisis remains a major economic issue, which was only exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. The onset of the pandemic brought with it so much uncertainty. The uncertainty surrounding the depth and the duration of the disruption had everyone questioning what will happen to the economy. We're losing jobs and we're losing businesses. How bad will it get? And will we ever get back to normal? That leads us to the question of what is normal and do we really want to go back there? When we started to look at who was actually being impacted, it brought us back to what we discussed at our forecast last year. Last year, we looked beneath the surface of the top line numbers to identify inequity and inequality present in the region, how the then sustained economic growth, full employment, and stock market highs didn't translate into prosperity for all. COVID-19 has only increased the severity of pre-existing challenges and inequalities, and if left unchecked, it may continue to do so for years to come. As we look deeper into who was being impacted by the pandemic, we noticed that certain groups, certain cohorts, and certain types of businesses were being disproportionately impacted. And we're going to go over a few of those groups and cohorts today. Currently, the county, Los Angeles County, has reported over 1 million COVID-19 cases since the onset of the pandemic, with about 1 in every 10 Angelenos having contracted the virus. Racial and ethnic minorities have been disproportionately affected by the virus. Los Angeles County was the first in the nation to report over 1 million COVID cases. And if we look at the people who've contracted the virus, over 60% of cases where the infected individual's race was confirmed has been attributed to Hispanic residents, compared to just 14% for white and about 5% for Asian and Black residents. Next slide. Due to the fast-moving nature of the pandemic's economic impact, we look to unemployment insurance claims filing data as a supplement to traditional labor force and industry employment data, which has a significant data lag. For UI data can act as an early indicator of what may transpire in the labor market prior to the more accurate monthly and quarterly figures publications. From March through December, close to 11.3 million initial UI claims were filed in California. But when we look at the demographic characteristics of the people filing those claims, we see again that youth, the less educated, and people of color were impacted disproportionately, as well as women. When we look at employment trends by income level, we really see a tale of two recoveries. Low-income workers, or those that make less than $27,000 per year, were far likelier to lose their job as a result of the pandemic, with nearly 40% of low-income workers losing their job in April of 2020, compared to 24% of middle income and 13% of high-income workers. While nationwide, the number of high-income jobs has recovered to their pre-pandemic level, low-income jobs are still 25% below that baseline and are trending downward. These jobs, often in service and accommodation sectors, require interpersonal contact and have been unable to operate normally due to public health orders. Within this inequity stems another offshoot of disproportionately affected populations. Many workers in these industries are people of color. As such, minorities have higher levels of unemployment. When looking at age brackets, younger cohorts are 2 to 2.5 times more likely to be unemployed than their older counterparts. And this age-related effect is exacerbated for minority youth. The American Time Use Survey reported that nationwide, working from home was an option for 24.5% of workers with only a high school degree, compared with 67.5% with at least a bachelor's. While 48.7% of non-Hispanic white workers were able to transition to working from home, just 39.5% of Black and 28.9% of Hispanic workers had this ability. Telework jobs are concentrated in knowledge-based industries, in business, financial industry, education, and training, as well as office and administrative support occupations. Jobs that cannot utilize telework are based in production, sales, transportation, and healthcare, to name a few. With a large manufacturing and production base in Los Angeles County, as well as a high degree of emphasis on travel and tourism, entertainment, infrastructure, and retail, a large number of jobs in the region simply cannot be moved online, leading to higher levels of unemployment for workers in these industries. When we look at households with internet availability, and then compare that to concentrations of minority populations and poverty, we see a relationship that highlights the importance of closing the digital divide, especially as work and education they're now remote. Let's take a closer look at those receiving unemployment benefits. The maximum weekly benefit in California is $450 per week. For context, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, defines very low income as 50% of the median family income. And in California, that median family income in 2019 was just over $91,000. Without supplemental benefits, all claimants are below this threshold. And with close to 80% of low-income workers in California estimated to spend more than half their income on rent, for unemployed households, meeting basic needs became much harder with just regular unemployment benefits. The tale of two recoveries applies to businesses as well. Larger businesses typically have greater access to liquidity, which affords them more opportunities to retain employees and remain temporarily closed for longer. The federal government's Paycheck Protection Program attempted to level the playing field by offering small businesses up to $10 million in loans. While intentions were well, many businesses initially were not able to gain access to these loans. In terms of equity, a Brookings report shows even deeper problems with the initial PPP system, as small businesses and communities of color had unequal access to federal COVID-19 relief. It took businesses with paid employees in majority Black zip codes an entire week longer to receive loans than those in majority white communities, and businesses in Latinx communities 6 days longer. Moving forward, governments should look to provide liquidity fairly to all communities, not just those with established banking connections. Women have been dropping out of the labor force during the pandemic. The combination of the lack of childcare options due to closures, the degree of supervision required for online schooling while children are at home, and the high proportion of women working in service sectors heavily impacted by COVID-19 and stay-at-home orders have taken their toll. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, women comprised just over 47% of the labor force in January of 2020, but they accounted for 58% of the 4.3 million people who have dropped out of the labor force between January of 2020 and January of 2021. Just a reminder, an individual must be employed or actively seeking work to be counted as part of the labor force. The novel coronavirus had unprecedented employment impacts across the nation. Employment fell nearly twice as much in response to the stay-at-home orders than what we experienced during the Great Recession. So these negative employment impacts were worse in major U.S. cities, a trend that we also saw in the Great Recession. Many workforce inequities can be better understood when looking at how different industries were impacted by the coronavirus. The leisure and hospitality industry has been entirely upended as the virus diminished demand for travel and recreational activities. Airlines were some of the most affected businesses as revenue passenger miles, a key industry metric, remained down 73% year over year. The trade, transportation, and utility sector also saw huge employment losses as retail trade and passenger transportation plummeted as a result of regional and national stay-at-home orders and travel restrictions worldwide. Personal services and ambulatory healthcare services also fell dramatically as these non-essential businesses were forced to temporarily shut their doors, or in the case of ambulatory healthcare services, much of their visits were transitioned to online telehealth options. Local government budgets were limited in 2020, resulting in the loss of 750,000 government jobs nationwide. Intuitively, those working in the industries that were hardest hit were also disproportionately impacted. Hospitality and retail trade heavily employ youth and people of color. Luckily, with the expedient vaccine rollout in the US, these industries can hopefully begin the recovery process. We see two different experiences when comparing Main Street to Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, as with most other major indices, have recovered and surpassed their pre-COVID levels. Meanwhile, revenue from the sale of goods and services remains below its pre-COVID levels. Not to mention unemployment as of January 2021 in the US is 2 times the pre-pandemic level. So stock prices are inherently forward-looking, and so an expedient economic recovery is priced into the index's value. Meanwhile, smaller businesses, namely restaurants and clothing stores, have been struggling. Needless to say, the stock market is not an indicator of the economy at large, especially when it comes to small businesses which lack the same liquidity lines as their larger counterparts. And because I'm an optimist, I like to end on a positive note. One silver lining of COVID-19 could be the introduction of mRNA vaccines for general use. Widely studied but never approved for human use, mRNA vaccines emerged as the leading option to vaccinate against COVID-19. While they operate somewhat differently than conventional vaccines, mRNA still aim to emit the same immune response. Additionally, they can be manufactured faster, cheaper, and safer than conventional vaccines, as they do not require an active or inactive pathogen for production. The 2 most distributed vaccines in the US right now for COVID-19, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, are both mRNA-based. The US leads the world in total number of vaccines administered and is 4th per capita behind Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and the United Kingdom. California is moving at a somewhat accelerated pace as well, with over 5 million residents vaccinated, 1 million of which are Los Angeles County residents. In the future, a fully vaccinated population looks to be a necessity in fully opening up service sectors across the US and abroad. A large conversation going forward will be equity in vaccine distribution. Not all countries can afford to vaccinate their entire population, and globally, spikes in developing countries will hamper economic recovery worldwide. On a more local level, if the pandemic is hitting certain communities harder, how can they be adequately supplied with vaccine doses? The economic strength of the last decade was rapidly reversed beginning in March of 2020. As a result of the rising infection rate and the resulting business restrictions, the beginning of 2020 brought dramatic spikes in job losses. The pandemic has had disparate effects on women, people of color, low-wage workers, workers who are young, and with lower levels of education. Small businesses and service sectors have been disproportionately impacted. Looking forward, the next 2 years will be characterized by economic recovery, the speed of which remains tied to the public health crisis. Should the efficacy of the vaccines adhere to the initially published numbers, we estimate that the majority of industries will return to pre-pandemic employment levels by 2024. Achieving herd immunity through vaccination would likely reverse the employment contraction, but population growth and housing accessibility troubled the Golden State long before COVID-19. Going forward, we need to ensure that we continue to allocate time and resources to address California's longstanding challenges so that we are better prepared for the next economic shock. I want to thank you for your time this morning, and I'd like to take a quick moment just to acknowledge the IAE team who worked very hard to prepare this forecast for all of us today. Thank you.